Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, a co-founder of the Table Collective. The 35th and final episode. Turns out this project has been my companion for almost a year of life. Looking back, there's so many things I wish I could improve or redo. There's things in earlier episodes that I would say differently based on things I came to see in new ways in later sessions. And at the same time, that reflects exactly what I had set out to do. Make something that was not mapped out prior to starting. I wanted to make the map as I went along. The result is a kind of public chronicle of a more personal process of discovery, which means that these episodes are not a final magnum opus. There is still more to explore, and future discoveries will almost certainly change my current ways of seeing things. So in this final episode, I want to do several things. I will share about the frameworks out of which I operate, especially relative to the religions of the world, since I've drawn so heavily upon them during the course of the podcast. And there's two frameworks: the way I see religions as works of art and creative expressions of human spirituality, and then a framework I call mutualism. After that, I want to share some examples of how I see things drawing from the religious heritages we have primarily looked at during these weeks. Then I'll summarize the current state of my own conclusions after 34 episodes in this Cow Behind the Barn journey, my answers to the question I asked near the beginning, where and when did I begin? And then finally, I want to share a little bit about what's next. That's a lot, so I'll get to it. My two frameworks for how I see religion and the religions can be labeled as art and mutualism. And I'll take mutualism first. If you've been following along, you know I frequently refer to different religious heritages and sacred texts. Moses, the Gita, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Jesus, and Muhammad have been frequent visitors in these sessions. Here's a little background behind why those in particular have been important to me. In my late teens, I had a profound spiritual experience which was shaped by the heritage of my childhood, Christianity. As a teenager, I was introduced to the mystical poetry of John of the Cross, which shaped how I began to interpret the Christian life and also its sacred texts. I attained a master's degree in theology, during which I studied Hebrew and Greek and developed a deep love of the original biblical texts. I loved their spiritual depth, and in many cases their artistic beauty. I continued to be drawn to the contemplative streams of my Christian heritage. And then in my early 20s, I had the first of what became a significant variety of cross-cultural and interreligious experiences. In my life, I've lived in East Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. I've lived among Muslims and, to a lesser extent, Hindus and Buddhists. Later, I pursued a PhD in translation studies, a focus largely inspired by my appreciation for the ways that Muslims approached the translation of the Quran in the Urdu language. This further deepened my love for religious texts and drew me to the Bhagavad Gita, the Buddha, and more. And it was this journey and these experiences which drew me more and more deeply into the life of Moses and Jesus and the Quran and Muhammad, and into Buddhist and Hindu texts. More recently, I also found my way to Lao Tzu. In my experience, every heritage has much to offer and teach to the others, which implies they can each receive from the others. If they were each a person, I would say that they can each be ready to receive and learn and ready to offer and give and to be transformed together. Each heritage has pieces of the whole puzzle. They can each sit at the table and break bread and grow and be transformed. That's the framework that I have come to call mutualism. Mutual giving, mutual receiving, mutual transformation. This connects with my conclusion over the past weeks that small e empathy and big E empathy are at the heart of reality, because just as empathy enables us to put ourselves in the place of others and feel what they feel and think what they think and fear what they fear, so too with religions, empathy enables us to get inside the heart of an unfamiliar religion to some extent, to feel and experience its ways of seeing from the inside. Empathy makes mutualism more fully possible. Well, what about the framework for religion that I label as art? Given that this is a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine, as experienced and interpreted by an artist, here is where I get to summarize some of what that means, at least some. As an artist, I began to see people like Moses and the people behind the Gita and the Buddha and Lao Tzu and Jesus and Muhammad as more than great religious founders. I began to appreciate each as, in their own right, artistic and creative founders, as what I sometimes call spiritual creatives. So for me, religions are works of art, creative expressions of human spiritual experiences. Let me explain further with some basic, obvious observations. First, of course, human beings exist. That's obvious. But human beings have always created cave paintings, new tools, improved ways of living, or agriculture, songs, poems, stories. All of it's creative. We just can't help it. Human beings have always tried to share that art with others. That's, in fact, why there are cave paintings. Human beings have always reported, in addition to all this, having what I would call spiritual experiences. And human beings have always sought to share these experiences with others, and to do so, they've used language to describe them. They've created rituals and ceremonies so that these experiences could be shared. And as a result, what we call religions have come into being. Humans created them out of that same creative spark that results in art. In other words, the spiritual nature of human beings required the creative nature of human beings to express itself. And so our creative nature has also resulted in the religions we have found and formed to express our spiritual nature. Our artistic and religious selves are entwined. So I see religion as an artistic form. And by the way, I see art as a spirit form. Religions are like vast expressions of folk art, I would say. They're rituals and vocabulary and metaphors and analogies and stories and arts and music and poetry are like vast murals created over long periods of time by multiple hands, and they continue to feed and nourish the souls of millions and millions today. Now, I won't take the space and time here to summarize everything about what all these things lead me to, what some might call a theology of some sort of synthesized mix of these religions, some sort of organized, rational, creedal formula. Instead, I want to share first what I appreciate about the 6 great religious heritages I have focused on in the podcast, and with apologies to those I've not included, such as the Granth of the Sikhs or the sacred writings of the Baha'i. And after that, I'll share at least one of the things that I've not been able to assimilate. But before I move on, this seems like a good place to share again a poem that I've shared before, because it expresses my mutualist view of things, a poem called Truth and Truths. Truth and Truths. When my truths, hummed in this key, and your truths, hummed in that, meet, and meeting shed each discordant note, align to one true chord, find flight and give voice to living words. Then every song will echo, thronging, vibrant, alive, shimmering in a vast chorus of our varied truths, woven in one united opus, and all, and each, together, with full-throated glee, we will know and name the truth. So what does that look like then? What follows is a very selective and by no means anything approaching trying to share everything that I have received. It's a selective smattering of things from these different founders, these different spiritual creatives and heritages. Let me start with Moses. Moses experienced the divine as a compassionate, merciful God who initiated and acted and spoke, created, ordered, and intervened. Moses also asked frank, open, hard questions of God and about God. Moses is honest about his self-doubt and frustrations. This is a way of relating to the divine that is woven throughout the Jewish scriptures and on into the rabbinic traditions of Judaism. So Moses offers to me and to the other religions a vision of the divine that I would describe as living and personal, but also one with whom one can interact honestly and transparently. The Gita. According to the Gita, everything in nature, prakriti, is an extension of the divine energy. Nature is pulsing with the divine, energized by it. The divine is caught up in, found in, and is connected to everything around us. This view of things has found its way into my experiences of nature and the divine, and I'll say more about that later on. The Gita has also shaped my spiritual life through its insights about working and creating without working and creating, and insights about working and creating without worrying about the fruit or result or the response that those things I do or make might elicit. The Gita also inspires me to ask, as Arjuna asked Krishna, for God to not only teach me things or explain things to me, but to enable me to actually experience divine truth and life. The Buddha. I don't have words actually to express how much I appreciate Buddha's exacting explorations of his inner mental processes, his profound self-awareness. And by that, I don't just mean self-awareness of motivations or feelings, but his deep exploration of how the mind works. The Buddha provides an extremely helpful framework for me in my own contemplative life and my meditative life. I've been helped by incorporating, in particular, compassion, empathy, sympathetic joy, and equanimity in my meditations, what are called the 4 Brahmaviharas in Buddhism. I keep coming back to those over and over, particularly in recent days, and they're profoundly helpful to me in my own engagement with people and life as an artist. And then there's the insights of the Buddha about the interconnectedness or interbeingness of everything, which has helped me to see and experience and articulate things in a new way. Now I turn to Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu encourages me to be comfortable with mystery, with leaving things, and especially ultimate reality or the way, the Tao, undefined. He goes so far as to say that if we can define reality, then it is not reality that we have defined. His insight about the way that emptiness matters will always stick with me, affecting how I approach time and work in my own art. I'm thinking here of his example of the clay pot, the essence of which is not its outer shape, but its inner, empty space. Next up is Jesus. The 2 things I will focus on here are the person of Jesus and the teaching or path that he gave to his followers. The texts of the Gospels portray the person of Jesus as so in union with the divine, whom Jesus experienced as a tender, generous, loving Father, that in some way the divine heart also experienced all the brutal, painful, bloody mess of humanity that Jesus experienced, and lovingly took it all into the very being of God and, my word here, metabolized it and continues to metabolize it. John's Gospel also includes the fact that we are included in this union. We are drawn into the divine life, and the divine life is in us. In the prior episode to this one, I explained that this vision of the divine, which panentheism helps give me words for, is the only way I can continue to believe in a just and merciful divine being in the face of the evidence of human and cosmic history. The second thing that I wanted to mention about Jesus is Jesus' teaching and the path he gave to his followers. The Sermon on the Mount is perhaps the most famous collection of his teaching, and from the various things Jesus touches in that collection of sayings, I've just got space for one example, which is the way he summarized everything in the core principle, love your neighbor as yourself, and extended that to include the love of enemies. I'll just add that it's in the teaching of Jesus that I find the most direct and clear affirmation that the divine nature is, at its very heart, love. Well, this brings me to Muhammad. And the first thing that I'm going to mention is the Quran's metaphorical and poetic power, the fierce beauty of the language of the Quran. Muhammad is unfortunately caricatured and misrepresented in negative ways, especially in the West. But while there are incidents in his life that need to be honestly faced, overall, the picture I have of his character is a man of integrity and humility. There's also a deep sense of justice and mercy in his life that I think is quite unique for a man of his time. But he was also a gifted poet who spoke in rhyme and in rhythm and with powerful metaphors and analogies. I'll just add 2 comments about the Islamic tradition as a whole. It won't surprise people to hear that I'm particularly drawn to the Sufi streams, just as I'm drawn to the contemplative streams of my own original religious heritage as well. And then also in one season of life, I practiced the cycles of prayer, the 5 times a day prayers. That pause during the day 5 times inspired a contemplative, meditative rhythm in life. And while I don't pause 5 times a day now, finding regular open spaces in the day has remained a part of my inner fabric. Well, what does this cause me to say about the divine? I looked at the various theisms, as you know, and came to the conclusion that panentheism best describes me. It seems to make sense of quantum physics. It's in sync with some of the source texts of Christianity, and I would say it accounts for a way to see the truths of the Gita and Lao Tzu on the one hand, both of which tend towards the pantheist views, and the Quran and Jewish scriptures on the others, which are clearly monotheist. In addition, panentheism, all in Godism, or God in all-ism, accounts for my personal experiences of the divine and of nature. I have had and still have experiences of transcendence in which I experience the divine as other, and I have had and have experiences of immanence, of the divine nearness, union, the divine so entangled in the world around me and with me that the divine and nature seem indeed to be one and the same. Panentheism helps me understand that. Other stuff. Does this summary of things I appreciate imply that I just mix everything together and make it all agree? Am I avoiding disagreement and conflict? No, there are actually definite points of tension. And at some point, I want to elaborate more on that, and I'll say more about what I plan to do about that in the future in my concluding comments later on. For now, I'll just share one area that I'm unable to digest, and it is one I find in most of the heritages. When I read the Jewish scriptures and the accounts of God ordering the conquest of the land, and there's similar examples in the Quran, or when I find the Gita seems to treat too lightly the very real suffering of an impending battle, I have to be honest. I don't see how these can find ethical justification. Now, perhaps it's a limitation of my own moral compass, but until I'm convinced of that, I'm trusting the compass. I don't believe such violence, some examples of which by any objective measure would be considered genocide, to be representative of the divine character, or the divine purpose. However, something I notice and appreciate in all the heritages, even those which have examples of the divine being authorizing violence and war, is that there are also texts encouraging nonviolence, or at least passages aimed to mitigate, lessen the violence. Values based upon nonviolence seem clearest to me in 2 of the heritages. One is the Buddhist teaching, and the other is the life and teaching of Jesus. And further, in the case of Jesus, we also have an example of something more than teaching, for he lived in keeping with his own words in the face of false accusations and torture and death. Without going into more detail, I stand with the pacifists, but I do so realistically, with the knowledge that nonviolence is impractical and seems like a fool's dream, unrealistic politically. It seems, however, that it's the only way for true lasting peace, and I believe that there is a tipping point, the point of critical mass when enough people in enough countries not only want a nonviolent world, but live in keeping with that vision, willing to face whatever that may cost before it's widely embraced. And frankly, may that tipping point come soon. There's a lot more to say about these heritages, and I plan to do that. And I'll say more about how I'm going to do that later. But now I'm going to turn my attention to attempt to summarize the 34 episodes of my life. Where and when did I begin? I asked so innocently way back then, which sounds like the start of a humorous poem. But I digress. Since I have summarized things along the way that I was coming to conclusions about, this will be more like a brief recap, I hope. Cosmos, time, and consciousness. How I see the cosmos. The cosmos is a vast, constantly changing, emerging, generative, and regenerative process in which everything is entangled in at least three ways. First, quantum entanglement tells us that subatomic particles respond to each other from vast distances. They're connected, and they act as if they have minds of their own. Second, our perceptions and experiences entangle us with what we perceive and experience. We are not separate from what we experience, and what we experience is not separate from us. We influence one another. We're entangled. Third, another way I understand the entanglement of the cosmos is, to use the word that comes from John's Gospel, towardsness. Things are entangled and particles behave the way they do because towardsness is the essential nature of everything. So we are all wrapped up in everything and each other in the entangled thing we call the cosmos. We are part of our where and vice versa. How I see time. First, the present. The present moment is so infinitesimally minute as to be non-existent, at least experientially. The moment something happens, it's gone. The present is never present. And the future? Well, the future, by definition, is not here. What about the past? When I try to grab hold of a present moment, it has already slid past me. And what I hold is something I'm experiencing with my memory. Memory is the most pervasive ingredient in our experience of time, and thus a major element in our consciousness, in our I. This means that memory is a defining element of who we are, of our experience of being selves. In later episodes, I came to realize that when we put ourselves back into a memory, we're re-experiencing it. And that function of remembering and of putting ourselves back into something that happened with the people who were part of it is using a part of us very much like empathy. And so empathy and memory are two primary elements in our experience of time and in our experience of being conscious. Speaking of which, how I see consciousness. I think in thinking about consciousness, I began from a framework that described different dimensions of consciousness that included just experiencing things, awareness of experience, awareness of being aware of having experiences, and then the possibility of an awareness of the awarenesses that others have as if their awareness was my own. That's a level of entanglement with another subject or subjects in which one experiences the experiences of another subject in the first person as the other first person, not just as if I were the other. And that's what led me eventually to conclude that empathy is a more fundamental ingredient of all forms of consciousness than I had ever considered. And that means for me, there is a big E, empathy, that is essential to the nature of any big C consciousness that there may be. Now, combining all the where and when and I'd say this. Place, time, and consciousness are all entangled and woven together in empathy, our empathy, and in and with big E empathy, small c consciousness, and big C consciousness in the natural and the divine. Well, so what? Well, one implication for me from all of that is that through practices like meditation and mindfulness, we can come to cultivate these elements of big R reality in our own being. And this is possible because they are real. They are aspects of ultimate reality, and they're aspects of our nature. And cultivation of our entanglement, cultivation of empathy, can foster shared ways of seeing, shared emotions, shared experiences, creating a sort of unified field of experience in which our individual experiences and minds and consciousnesses are all shaped by the collective landscape of humanity and ultimately the cosmos. And as we cultivate these qualities, we contribute to shaping that landscape too, which means changing it. How? Going back again to episode 1, there are butterfly effects, good and bad. Because of cosmic entanglement, we, can cultivate empathy, and as a result contribute to the positive butterfly effects that may impact others and even the cosmos. There are Buddhist ways of speaking of this, and there are ways rooted in the New Testament. The latter suggests that there are divine butterfly effects, and a divine way of metabolizing evil and suffering, a divine way we participate in or can. And so again, I have hope that through the cultivation of empathy, in connection with big E empathy, ultimately everything will existentially become what its ontological nature is, empathy. As I put it in the last episode, I have hope for a future in which empathy and love will win. Now, though I've shared it before, all this talk of butterfly effects suggests to me that for my last creative offering in this series of podcast episodes, I'll share my song Butterfly Wing again. It was in my very first episode, so here it is again in the last one, bookending things. And in many ways, if one listens to it now through the lenses of all the episodes between 1 and 35, one can find many ways in which this song summarizes the intention of the cow behind the barn, because the song is an expression of how I as an artist experience and interpret humanity, the world, and the divine. Here's the song.
They say that all it takes is the wing of just one butterfly to change the course of time. In a broken life, a million miles away, million miles away, million miles away, million miles away. They say that all it takes is just one gentle whispered word, and though it not be heard, it can still do its work. A million miles away, a million miles away, miles away, million miles away. Shadows fall around like acid rain, soak into our souls and leave bitter stains, pouring out from inside hearts long shattered. My tiny soul, do anything that could matter. From a million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away. They say that all it takes of just one butterfly to change the course of time in a broken light. They say that all it takes is just one gentle whispered word, though it not be heard, it can still do its work a million miles away, a million miles away, a million miles away. Million miles away, million miles away, million miles away, million miles away. They say that all it takes is the wing of just one butterfly.
Now, as I conclude, I'm going to quote myself again from the last episode. I know my explanations won't satisfy everyone, but as of today, this is where I stand. I've said a number of times that I would talk about what's next, so what's next? As I'm coming to the end of the episode, and the end of the whole Cow Behind the Barn series, I'm very aware of how incomplete and inadequate this all feels, which means I'm aware of how inadequate I feel. There are still unanswered questions and unasked questions I haven't thought of yet. There are loose threads. There are connections left disconnected, and tensions and paradoxes and contradictions left unexplored, including in my own thinking. So what next? Well, I'll keep exploring, for one thing, and I hope you will too. And one way for you to do that, by the way, is a course I helped develop for the Table Collective called Wisdom for Artists from Ancient Wells. You can find out more about it at Table Collective's website, tablecollective.art. But for me personally, one of the things I'm aware of is that each time I brought sacred texts from the various heritages into the conversations, I always wanted to say more about them, a lot more, and not just in terms of the ways they contributed to whatever theme I was addressing at the time. So, next, I plan to find space and time to listen and to let them speak more fully, speak to me, speak to each other, as it were. They don't always agree with each other. They can each add to the others, and they can each receive from the others. I want to explore all of that more fully and freely, and to share that with others. So at this point, although I'm concluding the Cow Behind the Barn podcast, I am planning to begin a new project. I will focus more deeply on some of the sacred texts that most interest me, taking time to, as it were, meet with each of them individually, but then I'll also find ways to let them talk to each other. It won't surprise you to hear that some of the texts I plan to explore in this way will include early chapters of Genesis, the Gita, more of Buddha's suttas and sutras, the Tao Te Ching, the Gospels of Luke and John in particular, and the Quran. I may end up including others too, such as the Granth, we'll see. And how? I'm not sure yet, but most likely I'll be sharing that in one form or another on my YouTube channel, Kevin Caldwell Music. And I invite you to check that out even before I get going on this. There's a lot of material there already on music and poetry and a few short comments that I've made. Anyway, I hope to see some of you there. Well, here I am, about to sign off. And so I'm going to end with a slight modification of my normal sign-off and say here that whatever next time might mean, I hope to see you next time.